Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 25th of June 2015. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Warner Bros. Pulls Arkham Knight from sale on PC. The reviews and benchmarks for AMD's latest Fury X platform have been released, and Apple has removed all Civil War games from the App Store as a result of the use of the Confederate flag. All this in the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. After an exceedingly rocky launch, the PC version of Arkham Knight has been pulled from sale by Warner Bros. Themselves. In a message posted on the game's Steam announcement board, Gary Lake Shall stated that they wish to apologize to those who were experiencing performance issues with Batman Arkham Knight on PC. We take these issues very seriously and have therefore decided to suspend future game sales of the PC version while we work to address these issues to satisfy our quality standards. They even recommended using the Steam refund system, which, considering this is Warner Bros. We're talking about, makes me believe that we've fallen into some kind of alternate dimension. This is unprecedented, as far as I'm aware. I cannot think of a single occurrence where this has happened. We've had really bad releases before, had awful games before, but never, ever has a major publisher pulled a game from Steam like this. Or indeed, not just Steam, everywhere. That's never happened. And for it to be such a major release, that's even crazier. Now, of course, speculation is flying absolutely everywhere in regards to this. The fact that this happened just after Steam refunds were put into play, a lot of people believe that there is some kind of connection there, and they may very well be right. This is the first AAA game to come out after the Steam refund system came into play, and it just so happened to be one of the worst ports that we have seen in a long time. Like, it's the worst port since Assassin's Creed Unity last year, and for some people ran even worse than that. According to Steam Spy, a third-party website which tracks sales, which is relatively accurate, although not hugely accurate, Batman Arkham Knight sold over 250,000 copies in its first day, and now we're going to be treated to a reasonably rare opportunity to actually see the effect of refunds. Because what Steam Spy does is it crawls people's Steam profiles. It's like an exit poll for Steam. And it tries to figure out just how many people within a certain margin of error own a game. And it's pretty accurate. It was used recently for Sunset, a game that did not do very well at all. And it correlated quite well with the number of sales that the company behind that game claimed to have, i.e. around 4,000. So I think we can probably say that the numbers are fairly accurate. So what we're going to see in the next few days is most likely a drop. Currently, we don't have enough statistics to actually see that. Right now, it's claiming there are 292,313 owners as of the 23rd of June. And it takes a little bit of time for this system to actually work. But we're going to see that drop because this game is no longer on sale. Now, in previous circumstances, the amount of refunds required to actually drive the numbers down when a game was still on sale would be massive. It would just show as slow sales for the most part. But we are now in a situation where you can't buy the game, meaning that we are going to see those numbers drop. So I'm very interested to see just what is going to happen with this. I mean, this is the biggest test yet of the refund system. And one also has to wonder if there's any cost incurred by the developer other than just losing that money. I mean, there's got to be some cost associated with it, and I wonder who absorbs that. Is it absorbed by Steam? Or is it absorbed by the publisher? Or is it a split agreement? I just don't know. We don't know the intricacies, the inner workings of the system, and where that money actually goes, but nothing is free. There's got to be some sort of cost associated with doing this, even if the system is mostly automated. So I have to wonder who ends up picking up the bill there. And would removing it from sale even help? I mean, I suppose it would slow the number of refunds because it would slow the number of sales, but now you can't buy it at all, you're just going to get nothing but refunds, right? The thing about pulling the game from sale is it indicates that this is probably not a quick fix. If it were, then they'd have just wrote it out, got a patch out, and just started to fix things piecemeal. And people would have been relatively happy, and it's like, okay, it's going to be fixed, we'll be alright. But pulling it from sale indicates that this game is going to take a while to get right. And I did my port report yesterday. It released literally 2 minutes before the game was pulled from sale. I was afraid the video wouldn't do all that well, but it appears it's doing even better as a result of this. And my conclusion was simply this: even on monstrous hardware, the performance is unacceptable. On standard hardware, this game is most likely going to run like absolute arse. And I got a reasonably playable experience, but my PC is like the top 1%. There's no way that that represents the average gamer. And that game should have never come out in this state. I mean, this, to me, is a huge consumer victory. This is worthy of celebrating. I'm not happy that the game sucked, and I'm certainly not going to gloat over the fact that people pre-ordered despite my warnings, since, of course, there was no PC review code available for that game. That's not worthy of gloating over. That makes me sad. It makes me sad that people got ripped off. Because, yes, you should be able to trust publishers. You should be able to trust Rocksteady. But you can't. That's the problem. Thankfully, we now have some recourse. Imagine what would have happened if this occurred last year with a game like, oh, I don't know, Assassin's Creed Unity. Yes, you would be stuck with it. You would be stuck with it. And that game runs better now, but it took them over 6 months to get it into that state, and it's still not perfect, and it probably never will be. I mean, even Arkham Origins was left abandoned, and some of the bugs and performance issues in that game are still present after several years. But now we have a way to get that money back. Now we have a way to protect ourselves from this sort of thing. And thank God for that, frankly. Thank God for that. And maybe this will be a turning point. Maybe this will represent the time when companies realize that they can't pull this anymore, because we have a means to get our money back. We have a means to stick it back to that company and say, no more. We have had enough of this awful, awful business practice. Here's hoping, anyway. Maybe that's a little bit too optimistic. It probably is, but regardless, if you have a broken copy of Batman, which is most people, feel free to refund it. Even if you got it from Green Man Gaming, they are now offering refunds, so feel free to partake. The one thing I would say is the fact that they have taken such an extreme measure indicates to me that they're actually serious about fixing it. And you might say, well, Warner Brothers doesn't care about PC. To some degree, you're probably right, but it's still a fairly significant market, and this is a huge embarrassment for them. Absolutely massive. And I imagine that Nvidia is probably pressuring them as well, because this was a title that was given away with GTX 970s. This was a title that was being promoted as a big GameWorks game, one of the biggest games of 2015 by Nvidia, and now they have egg on their face, and I cannot imagine they're very happy about that. So I think this will get fixed eventually, but God knows when it will be. I mean, we don't know just how deep these problems run. After a great deal of anticipation, the benchmarks and reviews are in for the AMD Fury X platform, which was designed to compete at the high end with the GTX 980 Ti and the GTX Titan X. The hope for many people is that AMD would finally be able to really compete at the high end without creating very large dual GPU heat-generating cards, like, say, the 295X, which is still one of the highest benchmarking cards there is, but bear in mind it is literally two cards stuck together. And as we're well aware, both SLI and Crossfire have a number of issues, as we discovered yesterday with Arkham Knight, where it just flat out did not work. The Fury X is a fairly compact, high-end single GPU card with a new high-bandwidth stacked memory design, and the hope was that it would at least be able to equal or beat the GTX 980 Ti at that price point, which would put AMD right back in the race when it came to the high-end enthusiast-grade cards. Unfortunately, now the reviews are in, and the benchmarks from third-party independent websites seem to indicate that while it can be compared to the 980 Ti, it is not a 980 Ti beta at the price point, which has certainly left some people, myself included by the way, disappointed. I'll put some links to some benchmarks in the description below this video so that you can actually read up on it, but a couple of examples are this. Grand Theft Auto 5 on Ultra at 2560 by 1440 with all advanced options enabled. The Fury X ran a minimum of 29 frames per second and a maximum of 61, giving an average of 40.7, while the 980 Ti came up with a minimum of 36, a maximum of 80, and an average performance of 48. Far Cry 4 is a similar story, 24 minimum, 44 max, and 33 average at 2560 by 1440 with everything turned on. and 29 minimum, 54 maximum, and 39.9 average for the 980 Ti. These are hard OCP's benchmarks, by the way. Things do get pretty close at 4K resolutions, however. For instance, Witcher 3 with no hairworks on, for obvious reasons. We've got the Fury X at 25 minimum, 41 max, and 31.5 average, whereas the 980 Ti gets 26 minimum, 43 max, and 32.7 average. Battlefield 4 at 4K is again very close. You've got 44.8 average for the 980 Ti, whereas it's 41.9 average for the Fury X. Now, quite a few of those games have things like NVIDIA-specific features in them. They seem to have turned most of those off for the benchmarking. If we look at Tomb Raider, which was historically a game that ran very well on AMD, unfortunately, it's still not quite there, although it is very, very close. The Fury X at 1440p is looking at 82.5 FPS average versus the Ti, which is actually running at 80.9, although it does lose out at 1080p resolution versus 1440, with the Ti being slightly faster there by about 10 frames per second. That actually appears to be something of a constant. If you compare 1080p to 1440p in most of these benchmarks, you will see the Fury X does seem to perform a bit better at 1080p and does beat out the Ti in some scenarios. Like, say, Metro 2033, it gets about a frame more than the 980 Ti, although it loses out a couple of frames at a higher resolution. It is worth noting that the Fury X does have 4GB of video RAM, whereas the 980 Ti has 6. And of course, the higher resolution you go, the more certain games gulp down video RAM. And yes, there are games that will gulp down more than 4GB of video RAM in certain situations. Anyway, you can read the benchmarks for yourself, but the conclusion across the board seems to be this. Unfortunately, this card cannot compete with the 980 Ti, although it is better than the GTX 980. The problem is that you can now buy a GTX 980 for much cheaper than you can afford a Fury X, which is around $650 in the United States, £509 in the UK, whereas you can pick up a 980 for just over $500, including things like the super clocked versions. So that's really unfortunate. I am not happy with that. Yes, I use NVIDIA, but ultimately what I want is a competitive marketplace because that's good for everybody. And they got close this time. They did get close. Unfortunately, they just didn't push it over the top. And as a result, unless there are price cuts, then the chances are we will not see the Fury X outperforming the 980 Ti at that price point. There is one thing to bear in mind, though. All new cards, of course, do need a few driver updates to mature, so it is possible that with more driver updates, the Fury X will perform better, and we're not really sure just how well it does with overclocking as of yet. That thing is set up with a closed-loop liquid cooling system, so it is possible that you may be able to push it as high or higher than the 980 Ti, although it's worth bearing in mind, by the way, that even on air, overclocking a 980 Ti is still quite easy. So the conclusion for that seems to be that they didn't quite get it, although if you're looking for a lower end card, the 390X, which is their cheaper card, is pretty damn good at that price point and is actually cheaper than a 980 Ti and also outperforms it in many scenarios. According to the Guru 3D benchmarks for Grand Theft Auto 5 at 1440p, this card is actually equaling the performance of a GTX 980 for a little bit less of the price, and actually slightly outperforms it at 4K. Similar story with Battlefield Hardline. Exactly the same frame rate at 2560-1440, slightly outperforms it at 4K. So that actually seems like a pretty damn good buy. I mean, if you're looking to go slightly under the really crazy stuff, then it's worth having a look at the 390X, and of course benchmarks in the description below this video. So it's good that AMD is starting to catch up. It's really a shame that they didn't beat NVIDIA at the super high end. I'm hoping that over the next few driver updates they manage to get some of that performance back, and then hopefully they have a card that can go toe-to-toe with the 980, but I'm not too hopeful. It's a step in the right direction, though. It really is, and we absolutely do need AMD to be competitive at the high end. The last thing that I want is one graphics company to rule them all, thank you very much. And finally, developers of Civil War video games awoke to find their titles removed from the App Store as a result of their use of the Confederate flag. Titles such as Ultimate General Gettysburg and the Civil War games by Hunted Cow have now disappeared from the App Store entirely. This comes shortly after CEO Tim Cook tweeted that his thoughts were with the victim's family in South Carolina in regards to the Charleston shooting, and he wished to honor their lives by eradicating racism and removing the symbols and words that feed it, which apparently includes the Confederate flag itself, regardless of context, specifically historical context. According to a report by Touch Arcade, the reasoning that Apple is sending developers is because the title includes images of the Confederate flag used in offensive and mean-spirited ways. Now, I do not want to dig into the politics of this. It is not my place to do so. I'm British. I mean, what the hell can I say about flags that should be flying? The only thing that I will say on this is that my thoughts go out to those affected by the Charleston shootings, which was a truly horrific act. If you want political commentary on this, go somewhere else. This is a video game channel. But here's the thing about this. This is ridiculous. This is whitewashing history. This is ignoring context. This is absurd. These games are Civil War titles. They're not either glorifying the Confederate flag or endorsing the Confederate flag or everything associated with it. They're merely depicting it. If we were to go further with the more extreme example, the swastika in war-related games. Now, unfortunately, of course, in Germany, you can't display that, which, in my opinion, is ludicrous. I mean, talk about dooming ourselves to repeat the mistakes of the past if we forget this kind of thing. But when it comes to the Civil War, yes, that flag was used as a battle flag. It's called the battle flag of the Confederacy. So, yes, it's going to be used in Civil War games. That doesn't constitute an endorsement. We've seen so much of this nonsense lately, even going as far into the controversy of Witcher 3's racism, quote-unquote. People seem to have difficulty distinguishing the difference between depiction and endorsement. Depicting something doesn't mean that you endorse or approve of it. If a series has racism as a theme, that doesn't mean racism is great, guys. Same thing here. They're not endorsing the use of the Confederate flag, they're presenting it in a historical context when it was actually used. And Apple is the worst when it comes to this, the absolute bloody worst. We've seen them reject games about conflicts in Syria, for instance, because they don't want political games on their servers. In fact, we saw them go as far as to make this ridiculous quote: "We view apps differently from books or songs, which we do not curate. If you want to criticize a religion, write a book. If you want to describe sex, write a book or a song, or create a medical app. It can get complicated, but we have decided to not allow certain kinds of content on the App Store." It was essentially a rejection of the notion that games can be used to communicate interesting or thought-provoking ideas. It really is the infantilization of video games as we know it. It's rejecting video games as a real art form that can actually tackle tricky subjects. This is one step further than that, though, because these games are not trying to tackle tricky subjects. They're not endorsing the Confederate flag. They're not talking about slavery and racism and civil rights and states' rights and all of the other things that go into that particular cauldron. They're not talking about any of those things. They're merely depicting the Civil War, which, as I recall, was real. And we should probably not forget that. Apple's thoroughly childish attitude to this, in my honest opinion, does far more harm than good, and we will get nowhere by whitewashing the history of this damn thing. As long as Apple continues to treat gamers and games as child's toys, then we're not going to get anywhere on that platform, and I think it's blatantly obvious at this point that Apple is no friend to games developers, or indeed the art form as a whole. Alright folks, that about wraps it up. Thank you very much for watching the content patch, but before I go, I'd like to give you the OC Remix track of the day. OC Remix has a new free album out, and it is representing the CEO 2015 tournament by the name of CEO 2015 Champion. It comprises of the 10 different fighting games represented in the CEO tournament, and it includes original songs as well as remixes of tracks from certain video games. This one in particular is a rearrangement of DiCapra's theme from Ultra Street Fighter 4. It's by the artist Nutritious, and it's called Dash Cancel. You can download it for free in the description below this video, and I'll see you next time.